Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you are all well and will continue to stay well. At the end of this week's Parsha, the Torah teaches us, Vayavo Amalek vayilochem im Yisrael birfidim. Amalek came and held war with the Jewish people at a place called Refidim. Now, there are a few things that have to be understood here because the psukim are, so to speak, cryptic. They don't expand on the matter. Who's Amalek? Why did they come? Where did they come from? Why did they fight the Jewish people? And why, at the end of the parsha, does the Torah teach us that Milchama LaHashem ba'Amalek midor dor? That there's an eternal machlokas, eternal war, struggle against Amalek, and that it goes from one generation to the next. It's never ending. Amalek is a foe that is weakened, like this week's Parsha, Vayachalos Yoshua, but it's never completely defeated. It's always there somehow. So Rashi is of the opinion, Ein Mugdam U'Meuchar B'Torah. There is no set chronological order in the Torah. So therefore, Rashi quotes the Medrash that why was the place called Refidim? Sherofu Yedeya B'divrei Torah. Because the Jewish people already were weakened in their observance and study of Torah. So according to this interpretation, we must assume that the Jewish people already had the Torah. And that this, so to speak, is a war after Ma'amad Har Sinai. And that it is somehow directly related to the fact that they were able to make an egel, a golden calf. And because of that, that's why this trouble came upon them, that Amalek came against them. So again, that's dependent upon our understanding that there's no chronological order here. The fact that Matan Torah is in Parshas Yitro and this is in Parshas B'Shalach is not a problem. However, the Ramban and other Meforshim disagree with Rashi. And they say the Torah is written chronologically. The Torah is written in order. And therefore, if Amalek appears in Parshas B'Shalach, then it happened before Matan Torah. If it happened before Matan Torah, then what is the interpretation? Sherafu Yedeya B'divrei Torah. So one could say because they had certain mitzvahs already that were given at Morah, certain mitzvahs of Shabbos that were given already, Kibbutz V'Aim, or that there were traditional values that came from the house of Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, Yosef, the Shvatim. So that's what they became weakened in. And that the Divrei Torah here is not to be defined in its narrow, exclusive way as being words of the Torah itself, but it means the general concept of Jewish life and tradition, which they already were exposed to. So those are two streams as to understand this idea, and therefore Refidim is the name of a place. And we find later in Parshas Maseh, where the Torah recounts all of the way stations that the Jewish people stopped at, the over 40 places where they encamped. So Refidim is mentioned as one of the places. And therefore we don't have to come on to any midrashic interpretation or play on words in order to understand what is involved here. But the question, the few questions that I raised and are not original with me still remain. Vayovel Amalek, where did he come from? According to Jewish tradition, Amalek is a nomadic tribe. But we read in the Torah, in the Chumash Breshis, that Amalek is a descendant of Esau. And so Vayovel Amalek, he comes to renew the contest between Esau and Yaakov. Esau may have walked away from it, right? He goes back to Har Seir. He says to Yaakov, Yilacha, everything that you have is yours. Okay, don't worry. We're going to be brothers. But deep down in their hearts, they never walked away. And that Amalek is therefore only a later expression of the enmity of Esau to Yaakov. And it's an expression of what Esau said, that I'm going to kill Yaakov, which is what Rivka overheard. And that's why she sent him to Lavan. So Vayovel Amalek, Amalek comes from that. That's where he came from. Because there's no reason for Amalek to get mixed up here. The Jewish people are not threatening them. Basically, they have no territory to conquer. Later on, we will meet in the Sefer Yoshua and in Sefer Shoftim that sections of Amalek settled in the land of Israel, and there were wars over territory. But that doesn't apply here at all. They're just coming out of Egypt. What kind of territory? What kind of threat are they to anyone? And part of it, so therefore the question is, so then why does Amalek get involved at all? You know, later on we'll understand why Moab got involved. The Torah teaches us Balak is afraid, Midian is afraid, right? So they have legitimate concerns. But what does Amalek got to do with the whole story? Why should they make war? So therefore we have to say, Vayovel Amalek, Amalek came, he came from the original dispute here. He came from the dispute of Yaakov and Esau. And even though that dispute lay simmering, dormant for hundreds of years, because Yaakov undertook the burden of going down to Egypt, the burden of the Brit Bein Abtarim that the Lord had made with Avraham Avinu, and Esau was spared it. And when Esau relinquished the Bechorah to Yaakov, he, so to speak, got out of the obligation of the exile in Egypt. But nevertheless, Esau never really walked away from the fact that Yaakov took the Bechorah and that Yaakov took the Brachot. And that's where Amalek comes from. And we find in history, and you find in Tanakh, The story with Yiftach. The king there that wants to make war on the Jews. It's hundreds of years after Sichon and Og were conquered, after the Jews occupied Eber and for hundreds of years, it's settled. Yeah, here comes the king, and he says, "No, you took 300 years ago. You took my ancestors' property." And that's why I believe, in reality, I know very little, so you don't have to believe me. But I believe that, for instance, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, you'll also hear, if not the Palestinians, somebody will say, Gazlodim at them. It's our property. Because even when hundreds of years go by, past enmities don't disappear easily. You see it today. Scotland wants to break away from England. England and Scotland, hundreds of years, been united. No, we're going to knock it away. So many other examples. So that's where Amalek came. He came from this earlier dispute. Who is the Bechor? Who is entitled to the brachot? We can phrase it more pithily, who are the chosen people? Which lies at the heart of much of the anti-Semitism which exists in the world today. It certainly was the original religious anti-Semitism of the Christians. They're the chosen people. And Islam says that it is the chosen people. So it goes back a long way. It goes back to Yitzchak and Yishmael, and it goes back to Yaakov and Esau. And I think that we would do well to bear that in mind, because these are not just fancy drashot on psukim in the Torah. These are real issues. And the Torah has foresight regarding them, has opinions, has prophecy regarding it. So the Torah tells us, Vayovel Amalek, now 300 years, 400 years later, Amalek came and they said, okay, you cheated our Zaydah. And therefore they fought with the Jewish people. Even though they had no current stake in the game, so to speak. Even though they themselves are not involved here. Jewish people are going into the desert. They're not taking property from anybody. So Amalek had no reason to come. Amalek had no reason to fight with them. But if you look back enough, so there Amalek shows up, then there's plenty of reason. So that's why the Torah says, Vayovo Amalek. Amalek came. He didn't come at random. It wasn't they just bumped into each other on the way somewhere. But that's a continuation of the drama, of the struggle between Yaakov and Esau, and now it plays itself out centuries later. And that's why the Torah says that this is an eternal fight. Never is given to be settled. So even though we cannot identify Amalek today, they don't have an entity as a tribe. They're mixed up amongst all the nations of the world, but the idea of Amalek is here. Anti-Semitism is here. Hatred of the Jew is here. People are willing to fight against us. Those are from ancient causes. They're not necessarily what did we do now. We didn't do anything now. Nobody should despise us for now. But everything has a background. Everything is Vayovo Amalek. It comes from somewhere. And in coming from somewhere, therefore, it teaches us a great deal about our current situation and about future events as well. So I want to thank you all for listening. And tomorrow again, in Mirz Hashem at this time, please stay well and stay vaccinated, and we'll hear good news one from the other. Kol Tuv Selah.